Welcome everybody. Can you hear me? Yes? Thanks for coming everybody. I'm Anne Davis and I'm here representing the Friends of Araluen. We decided that it would be great as Friends of Araluen not just to raise the profile of Witchettys and Araluen as a wonderful facility that we all value, but also to celebrate the lives that make up this town. We're all connected by some means or another, by the freezer at Coles or with our best mate. But it seemed like a great opportunity to know more about each other. I remember thinking once that wouldn't it be great if you could go and borrow a living book, a living, breathing, walking book from the library, but it probably would feel a bit creepy and maybe it wouldn't really work. So this is, to me, the next best thing, that we can listen to people and know more about them as a consequence. So thanks for coming. I want to acknowledge the Friends of Araluen workers who you see as you come in, the wonderful committee. The speakers, and there's 6 of them today, we'll have 3, we'll have a bit of a break and then we'll have the other 3. Meredith Campbell, famous for being the bell ringer, is the timekeeper, because how do you reduce a big life into 10 minutes? She'll ring the bell at 10 minutes and then each of the speakers then has to wind up, not cut it off immediately, but they've got a minute then just to round off what they're saying. So there's drinks at the bar. Welcome, thanks everybody for coming. I want to acknowledge, of course, too, that this is Aranda land. We live side by side with Aranda people in this wonderful town. And it's, to me, very appropriate and a real joy that a very senior Aranda person and a dear friend of mine, Michael Liddle, is the first speaker. Please make Michael welcome. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. And I'd like to thank Anne and Bill, good friends of mine, for almost 33 years since I was quite younger in that photo there. But I've been good mates of mine for a long time, since the early days at Karma. And they asked me to see if I can do a bit of a talk. I said, yeah, no worries, for friends. I'll come and have a bit of a babble on a Sunday. And just to talk about something what I see as important is people might hear me talking on the wireless or see me on the television and might think, who is this person? Well, I sort of grew up here in Alice Springs and school and all that sort of stuff, and going to work, learning how to work was the main thing that I did, and I went out to places like Kings Creek Station and Angus Downs Station, and I bumped into John Cottrell there earlier, him and Marty. They'd seen me when I was a young bloke, but it was just learning how to work, how to use a shovel, how to do little things, and Ian Conway played a big role in that. Tim Landers teaching me how to work, putting work ethic in me. And when it come to having an identity, all I knew was a football culture of identity. Playing football for Pioneer Football Club. That was my culture and my identity. Because the group who I was hanging around lived and worked and socialised in that area. So with this photo there's a story, and it says, umpiring juniors as a penalty at the tribunal for abusing an umpire. And I remember in 1986 grand final, I played in the first grand final, about 18, and we lost by 15 points against Rovers. And the same old thing come about, the bloody umpires and blah, blah, blah. So the chief minister was just about to give the I don't know who the Chief Minister was in 1986. Who was it? Well, anyway, he was just about to grab the microphone like that, and I walked past and I said, the umpires are effed. So anyway, who's this young bloke? So I ended up doing 10 matches. I got suspended for 10 games. But in order so I could play the year after, they made me umpire 10 junior games. So I thought that'd be good. So I ended up getting into umpiring and coaching then. And I've coached teams in Tennant Creek and Alice Springs, while not at the league level in Alice Springs, in the league in Tennant Creek and against Tennant Creek versus Mount Isa. And we've won those games and won premierships. So as I come along in my life, I think, well, I got to about 25 and 26 and this drinking and fighting and the football culture and the Aboriginal culture, that was much the town of Alice Springs what it was, because when I was growing up, I had a grandmother named Polly Liddle from Hatches Creek. And you all might be aware of Hatches Creek country. It was an old Wolfram mine years ago, gold mine. And my old grandfather went there, Milton, and he met her up there when he was mining, brought her back here. And I'd often talk to her about what was good things, and she said, you need to speak Alyawara, you need to understand it. And I often think if she could only see me now, because I'm quite competent around the Alyawara language and talk it and read it through people in my journey to get to here. But that light of my identity never come on until I went to Tennant Creek and lived. And I moved there in about 1994 because this culture of Aranda people in not only Aranda but the Puga, the part Aboriginal people in Alice Springs, because of what happened here, was these people, especially in the area where I walked, the circle where I walked, these Aboriginal people had an identity, but it wasn't their true identity to country. They identified, they had identity, but they didn't identify. They didn't know how to identify. So my parents, the Liddles and the Millers, and a lot of other families, local raised families, they were a bit lost around this area. Because we got to remember that at that time, it was right to do the things that were accepted by white people in the growing of the town. So when it come to learning old Polly's language and where she was from, well, that took a backwards seat. Only just lately, people are starting to realise their identity. And I'm speaking for myself. I'm not responsible for other people's acceptance of our talk, but it's about my talk and my identity. What I see is making me as a person. So when I got to Tennant Creek, I found these people all talking to this bloke who knew he was a Alyawara young fella, knew he had family in the Aranda country, but no real connection. He knew he was a Pulla, but what does a Pulla call Ngwari? What does a Pulla call Kamar? So all these things, and I'm getting all these people, Alyawara people are living in Tennant Creek calling me grandson, or Panji, or Angoli, or Aringi, all these words. So I found an identity there in Tennant Creek, and I thought, no, that's it now. So that cultured learning of football I sort of, it took a second journey, second back row seat to me. I wanted to go and learn something else. So fast forward since 94 to here, whatever how many years it is, I've earned respect and trust from my Alyawara people, family, to talk for them. And anything I do around the town of Alice Springs is always a phone call to my family, the fathers. And you'll see a few pictures here, if you can roll them there, thanks. These workshops I've developed, they're always in consultation with my fathers. What about we do this? Because we were standing up learning. I was learning one early morning, and I looked around. There was only about 3 or 4 brothers of mine. Where's all these brothers of mine? Where are all these cousins? Well, they're off in town, or they're in jail, or they're not here looking after their kids. They're not here singing where we should be. So I asked them if we could run this workshop, because the only place we're listening is on a football oval. When we're on the footy oval, we're listening to an umpire blowing the whistle, pushing the back too high, and we follow the rules. But when we leave that oval, who is our umpire? We're not listening to people like these people. Run them now, I've just been told. We're not listening to people like these people no more. We're not listening to anyone, we're stuck in the middle. We're not following the white fella rules, we're not following the black fella rules. And it seems to me that a lot of people have lost their true identity, what it means in the sense of behaviour. If that bloke there is my cousin, well, I can have some fun with him. If he's my brother, I've got to sort of ease up. I've got to look after him. But if he's my nyanya, I can have a mob of fun with him. We can go and joke around and fool around. If that's my mother-in-law, I've got to show her respect and stay out of her way. So all these, your father, all these behavioural things, due to skin names, have all been forgotten. And that could be the thing that I think about relationships, about getting on with people in the Aboriginal world. And that's what I found when I went to Tennant Creek a long time ago, about that, how to behave to certain skin names outside of your own. But that's all my elders. You see them there sitting down. And you might know Biden, one bloke from Nungarpa, and Tulia, and Ndarangan, and Dairin. They work in the workshop. Another old bloke from Tennant Creek, Warramangakati, and that's my 2 fathers, this one. That a few of you locals here would know my old grandmother, old Polly. Polly's sister's sons, those 2 old, and you might know my fathers, Mick Liddle and Bob Liddle, them people. Well, that's their, out of 2 mothers from the northeast, a place called Akuranj, where they are true rightful Kotungalas for that area. Can't be taken away from them. Kal? Yeah.
I think we realise that really it just opens up a conversation, doesn't it? There's so much about what Michael is doing now in town, but I think having had at least that introduction, it makes ongoing conversations more possible. The next speaker I'd like to welcome here is Shon Klose. Can't see you, Shon. There you are. So over to Shon. She will illuminate aspects of her life too. Thanks a lot.
Hi everyone, I'm Shon. Some of you may know me and maybe many of you don't. I'm beginning this little 10-minute talk today with a beautiful rainbow butterfly because I want to talk about transformation and how I came to be here in the desert. I was born in Queensland. I don't have a lot of photos of my youth. It's in another house in South Australia, so I just have limited photographs here today. But I was born in Queensland, and I began my life with a very interesting piece of information when I was 16 years old, as I was going to go into nursing when I finished school. And that was that my body was very different to other people's bodies. I was born as an intersex person. So I over years found my way to drumming, which helped me to transform the trauma that I experienced. So I came here 14 years ago to work with Indigenous youth and trauma, and how trauma affects the brain, and how rhythm helps to mitigate that trauma. But just going back to we'll go to the next photograph. So I'll just go back in time again. As an intersex person, it's difficult for me to talk about my life without talking about this very significant time. That was in the mid-80s in Queensland. And as an intersex person, just briefly, if you want to know more about intersex, maybe you can research. It's way too long to sort of go into the depth of it. But I was born neither wholly male nor wholly female, congenitally. So my body was just my body. There's nothing else wrong with me, but I was sort of coerced and pretty much forced to have an operation to rectify and normalise my body, which caused great trauma. And that was as I was applying to get into nursing. Anyway, I got into nursing, and that was quite triggering for me because I'd had this operation. And I then found myself working within the medical model. And I didn't last too long. I did 2.5 years of general training, but I found the way, and excuse me for this, but the way male doctors at that time treated not just nurses, but women patients and patients in general, I lost my patience with nurses, with nursing and doctors, and so I left. I then went on to do Jillarooing for a couple of years. I went to Central Western Queensland, and I learned the skills, manual skills, and mustering and riding horses. And I seemed to be drawn to a lot of activities that were more male-dominated activities, even though I look as though I'm female. I sit very much in the middle. I'm very androgynous, and I'm probably fairly rare. Maybe you probably haven't met a person like myself, but the journey was quite a tough one, and I kept running away. So I was Jillaroo for a couple of years, and then I found myself in South Australia, great picking. And I saw an advertisement in the paper for the very first apprenticeships for women in Australia. So South Australia had the very first equal opportunities legislation. That was in 1989. And I applied for the government apprenticeship and got the government apprenticeship. And I completed carpentry, a trade in carpentry. And I was the first official female carpenter that had been through a trade in Australia. But then life took me on. I found, again, working in a very male-dominated area to be very challenging. It was not an easy journey. I found it very, very difficult, and the attitudes of men towards women were very difficult, so I found myself becoming a feminist. and really wanting to know about women's history, and also feeling very determined to continue to pursue activities or a career in my life that was not typically a female career. And to cut a long story short, I found myself, after I'd moved from Adelaide to Tasmania, wanting to learn rhythm and the drums. And that took me on an incredible journey to Africa. So, next slide. So this is a photograph of me in Ghana. And I had no idea of the power of rhythm to help to change a traumatised brain. Of course, over the years, I have been my own best experiment. The intersex journey was very deeply traumatic for me, and there was no one to guide me through that. I had never met another intersex person. No one could really give me appropriate counselling on what I'd been through. So I kind of accidentally found my way to Africa. And I found that as I was playing rhythm regularly every day, I was there for 7 months, I was changing. I became far more self-confident and felt a sense of worth, and I was surrounded by very beautiful, generous people, and I got to understand the story of what happened to the African people on the west coast of Africa as well, and got to observe how they were using rhythm to move themselves through poverty and through difficult situations. There was music and dance always around, and I was observing, even though these people were the poorest people I'd ever seen in my life, because at that point I had never been out to remote Indigenous communities, I witnessed this intense poverty, but at the same time this beautiful joy. So then I came back to Australia. No, leave it there. And I met King Marong, who's sitting over here there, who will speak a little bit later. I came back in 1999 and met King in Melbourne, and King was very beautiful. He invited me into a band, and I actually really started my apprenticeship in rhythm at that time, and worked in a band with King in Melbourne, and then continued to work with several bands. But during that time I was working also with people with mental health issues and homeless youth, and just the general public, and in corporate team building programs, and observing how rhythm was really bringing people together in the most joyful and joyous ways, even people who had a lot of fear around rhythm. So moving forward, in 2007, I was invited to come out and work in Mutijulu. So we'll flick the next slide. And this is actually a picture of the Ginger Porter drummers in Santa Teresa. But I was invited here in 2007 to work with Indigenous youth in Mutijulu, and the program was really successful. I was there for a month. I went back to Melbourne, and then I got a phone call inviting me to come out and work with Mission Australia, who I worked with for 6 months and then couldn't continue that contract, so I left that contract and then actually worked with Darcy's dad and Anne's partner Bill in Karma, and I became a contractor working with Indigenous youth. And as I didn't expect that I would stay in Alice Springs for such a long time, so it's been 14 years now, I thought I would only be here for a year. But the work was increasingly rewarding, and watching the youth go through their own struggles and fear, and feeling very insecure and unworthy, and feeling as though they wouldn't be able to do what I was encouraging them to do. But as the years went on and we persisted, I was working with my partner Svetlana Bunik at the time, we persisted, and we worked with this wonderful group, the Ginger Porter drummers, and a lot of these kids were really struggling in school, and we took them on a 4.5-year process, and they performed in many festivals, White Open Space, the Alice Desert Festival. We took them on a 12-day tour to Darwin. They did 12 gigs in 12 days, and they played at the Darwin Entertainment Centre without us on the stage, so we taught them 3 very complex arrangements. And then, next slide. And then we took them to Melbourne, and they performed at Federation Square for the opening of the Indigenous rounds in front of thousands of people. So, last slide. This is the Laniakea supercluster. And I know it's a big jump, but we all have tapestries and stories. We all have stories, and those stories create our tapestries for ourselves. But then we have all the greatest stories that form a tapestry of a town and a state and a country and a globe and then the universe. And healing is, there's many different ways to heal, and rhythm has been a deeply, deeply healing process for me and will continue to be. And yeah, thank you very much for listening today.
People's lives are remarkable and they're important, and thank you, Shon, for your amazing story too. Next person, and it's amazing this confluence of Alice Springs that people come from all over. And the next person too, Jen Standish-White. Jen, please come up. Jen also has a big story that's about how we all happened to get here, if we're not Michael growing up here and this being his place. So here's another story, Jen, thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Aranda people, the traditional custodians on the land on which we gather today, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and future. I was born in a small landlocked country called Rhodesia. It was a breathtakingly beautiful country, lying just north of the Tropic of Capricorn, so much in the same latitude as here. But we were blessed with a really temperate climate, and its summer heat were moderated by the altitude. Being inland, we were at about 5,000 feet. Apart from where the low felt, that part of the country, which was a much more arid land, and that's where my beloved mum and her dad before her were born. My dad, when he was aged 21, he migrated from London. And so I was really lucky growing up, my brother and I, in those early days. We enjoyed, much like here in Alice Springs, the grassy laneways between the houses, sun-drenched seaside holidays in the neighboring Mozambique, and friendly families always around us. And my dad, I remember those times when he meticulously restored toys for our Christmas and birthday presents. My mum, that's my precious mum, she taught me to hold tenderly that which you cherish. That, though, all changed in 1965, when many of the African countries were gaining independence from their colonizers. Our then Prime Minister Ian Smith, with his unilateral declaration of independence, eventually plunged our country into 13 years of civil war. There is never a good war, and to this day I fervently believe that there is a better way than in taking up arms. The most vulnerable are inevitably always the target. Our beloved country was ravaged by war, death traps with landmines being laid on roads into the farms, into the villages, and into the border areas. My dad, along with my brother, were called up. Dad operating radios up in the mountainous and beautiful Eastern Highland region of our country. I still cherish a book of pressed mountain flowers that he made for me on one of his call-ups. Those war years were fraught with terror, with anguish, and with a haunting loss. But they forged an unbreakable bond with the land that defined, scarred, and ultimately began the hesitant steps of a nation towards healing. So growing up, I went to obviously school, and then after a foray studying accountancy, trying to please my father, I spent a lot of my life trying to please my father. The gentle times of sewing with my mum and my gran, where my first outfits had no zips or buttons. Instead, they were held together with safety pins. And in 1978, I set off driving in my little Mini Cooper, the 3,000 kilometres from what was still then Salisbury, in an armed convoy through the barren Lowveld, just north of the border and into South Africa. I remember being absolutely bemused with the instruction from the army, who were at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end of the convoy, who said, "If the convoy's attacked, just pull over and take cover." Now, this was in the Lowveld, which was an arid, absolutely barren landscape, and not even the most resourceful of goats would have been able to find a blade of grass to forage on. However, we made it through that particularly dangerous area and into South Africa, and I travelled on down to Cape Town. And that's where I began a career studying fashion design. And I have to say, my previous nonchalance of safety pins to hold my clothes together was irrevocably changed forever. And I fell in love. That's Robbie, and that's at my graduation in 1979 from the Cape Town School of Fashion Design. After that, 1980, that was the year Zimbabwe became independent, and the new nation there was born. It was the year that Robbie and I, it was his practical year of his architectural degree, so we travelled together, first into the neighbouring country of Namibia, and then on into Europe. In those days, we used to say, we're going to the continent. We spent Christmas in Vienna and saw the New Year in on a very icy Greek island. Robbie and I married in 1982, and we became involved in the local repertory theatre. Robbie shone on stage. However, after my inaugural role as one of the big fairies in Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream, I preferred to be backstage, and then went on to work in a voluntary capacity, winning awards for my costume designs in varied productions at the theatre, ranging from an 18th century period drama called The Country Wife to a locally written play, Mondoro, about the revered spirit medium Mboya Nahanda. In those years, that's when we started our family, and I was really so blessed because as a mother, I was able to enjoy the best of all worlds. The opportunity to leave full-time work in fashion whilst continuing to create and sew at the theatre, and the absolute privilege of being at home with our two growing children. That's a picture of Maren, our daughter, 5 weeks old. On the farm, Robbie's parents were farmers. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. No photograph can convey the beauty of our homeland, nor words tell how it continues to occupy our hearts. Those first years, 10 years post-independence, were an act of faith in the future of our country. We enjoyed christenings, birthday parties, farm visits, and the love shared through innumerable and precious family gatherings. We had a really big family, particularly Robert's side of the family, lots of cousins, uncles, aunts. And we also enjoyed taking our children to quiet places like Mana Pools. That's myself with Maren and Jonathan at Mana Pools. Now, Mana Pools is one of the only game reserves in Zimbabwe, is the only game reserve in Zimbabwe where you are allowed to actually get out of you don't have to stay in your car, you can walk around the campsites were not fenced. For those of you who may not be able to see, but we had an elephant he was a young bull who used to come through the campsite every single day. So Mana Pools, it's on the Zambezi River, bordering with Zambia. And our children were so blessed as we were to grow up in that unspoilt landscape that was abounding with wildlife, with elephants, with buffalo, lion, leopard, hyenas, and the very scary Nile crocodiles who inhabited Mana Pools on that Zambezi River. There's all these waterways, really beautiful waterways, which crisscrossed. It's on this big floodplain, and they provided a really vital lifeline for the birds and animals during the dry season in Zimbabwe. In 1996, I joined a small team who worked alongside some Danish instructors to establish the very first, is it 10 minutes? Oh dear. Okay, I'm good. Are you sure? Oh, sorry. Sorry. It's because I'm so nervous, I'm talking slowly. When I timed myself, I was much quicker. Anyway, joined this small team we worked alongside some Danish instructors to establish the very first clothing design and technical institute in Zimbabwe, which was funded through the Danish aid agency, Danida. For me, it was such a rewarding time working alongside my students. That's me with my first year class of students, when I taught them and shared my skills in fashion design. However, it was a time of really raging political upheaval, and I was openly threatened for my activism when we were forcibly locked out of our premises by one of the government minister's wives, who was illegally trying to acquire the Institute's assets. We were granted a High Court order to stop her interference, which she blatantly ignored, and really sadly in 1997, the Danes had no option other than to withdraw their aid. That for our little family began a time of disquiet and a catalyst to look for a future for our children where legal recourse was upheld and political power did not usurp this. I then spent the remaining years that we had in Zimbabwe working in one of the largest clothing factories, developing their local and export range, and I was really lucky to travel overseas to secure new export markets. I went to Hong Kong, I went to Paris, to Germany. We had the most beautiful cotton grown in Zimbabwe, and I developed a range using our beautiful cotton. After the extreme violence of the 2000 elections in Zimbabwe, we visited Australia on what we called our LSD trip, to look, see, and decide. And we decided that we thought we'd be able to stay here. So we applied for a skilled migration visa. Now, as a spouse, I could only contribute 5 points, because I only had a diploma, I didn't have a degree, to the 110 points that we were required to accumulate to be able to secure a skilled migration visa. So unfortunately, we were 5 points short. However, we were really lucky, which is one of the reasons we also wanted to leave Zim, is we sold our house on the black market and secured some of the funds were paid to us overseas, and we were then able to invest that money in government bonds, which then gave us that additional 5 points that we were required. We also were really lucky as we left on Qantas's last direct flight flying out of Zimbabwe. Failing that, if our visas had not come through in time, we actually did not have the money to be able to fly any other route. The indescribable loss of leaving our homeland has irrevocably banished the word goodbye from my vocabulary. I don't say it ever. I can say it in that context. I also packed away my sewing machines and began, which in 2002, the year of the Outback, brought me to Alice Springs. I was really lucky. The first job I secured in Australia was to work with the Year of the Outback team, and so managed to travel, as I said, all over Outback Australia. After that first job, I struggled to find work in Brisbane, and over 300 unsuccessful job applications later, severe depression and the heartbreaking death of my beloved mum in Zimbabwe, I found purpose and a measure of peace through volunteering with the Indigenous community volunteers. While every ICV project was fundamentally about skills transfer, the real outcomes were not always immediately quantifiable. And it was sometimes the small outcomes and the gradual process of empowerment and the building of mutual trust in the long term that may have had the greatest impact on those in the community. I learned a great deal about my new country's ancient culture and was blessed to have our son Jonathan, who we call Jay, join me when on a project at Ingenuity Community in Cape York. There's us standing at the northernmost tip of Australia. We voted in our first Australian election after passing our citizenship tests in 2003. Running the gauntlet of the preference papers rather than the guns of armed soldiers. 2004 saw me appointed as Alice Springs' first general manager before I returned to Brisbane to take up the role with ICV as their first volunteer manager. There had some changes in the organisation, and that led me to come back to Alice Springs in 2006 to become their first their Northern Territory and South Australian regional manager. It was a time of much family soul searching. I'd been terribly unhappy in Brisbane for a number of reasons. And Alice Springs became my permanent home, with my children and my husband Robbie staying in Brisbane. We did, though, go back 10 years ago to our little family travelled together to Zimbabwe for Robbie's dad's 80th birthday. And it was with a sense of return and oneness that we finally scattered our beloved mum's ashes atop a tranquil mountain in the Eastern Highlands. Last one. My journey over the last 14 years in the Alice has led me to find work in management roles across the arts, Indigenous, social service and tourism sectors. So many beautiful souls have graced my life with their friendships. We've renovated our shed on our Papa block, Adrian and I rediscovered my love of sewing after a collaboration with Bachelor Institute's artists Betty Conway and Molly Naparula Martin. Using their stunning desert-inspired screen-printed fabrics, I designed and created the steampunk outfits for the 2002 Wearable Arts Awards. We laid our parents to rest on distant shores when their lives ran their course. I've learned to love kangaroos and koalas, and our little Australian family has grown and been blessed with our children marrying and the birth of precious grandchildren. In the middle, that's our daughter Merrin, who married Tez, and our son Jonathan and his wife Fran. That's at Merrin and Tez's wedding, which was a steampunk wedding, the inspiration for my desert steampunk. And I made the boys' outfits. In closing, love, though, has split our hearts in two. The heart where we are, the heart where we want to be. Thank you.
We're going to take a 10-minute break, but I just want to say that thanks to a grant from the Town Council, we're able to meet today. We've also got funds for 2 more of these sessions that we'll have in February and in March next year. So this is my little ad break. But now let's just have a stretch and 10 minutes, come back for 3 more speakers. Thank you. A friend just passed the comment that in the world of bad news, it's so great to hear the inspiration of people's stories. So thanks everyone for coming, and thanks especially to the 6 speakers to agree. This is all extracurricular for them. It's not like they're public speakers just waiting for the opportunity. I had to do various levels of arm twisting, but it's just fantastic that people are here and really put the time into shaping what they want to say. So yeah, thanks very much everybody again. The next person is Salmon, and he can reveal his own story. Doesn't need much introduction from me. Welcome, Sam. Thanks.
Jamie Miller asked me if this is vodka, and what was it, Jamie? Vodka floater or something? But no, it's just, unfortunately, just water and ice. They say you shouldn't follow children or animals on stage, but they did include Michael, Shon and Jen in that list. But never mind, what will be, so I'll give this my best shot. But please be kind. But first I need to address what I understand as a common misconception. Whilst I have nothing against the English, I'm not an Englishman. I am a West Australian. My father's ancestors settled in WA in 1834. My mother's in 1857. So my apparent English is a result of my mother telling myself and my family to speak properly, to enunciate every syllable and put the ending on words. So I'm still asked when I arrived in Australia. No, that's not familiar. No. Oh. Well, actually, it's a little bit. That's my sister's. Right. My life didn't start well. In 1953, I was christened Alan David Forrest Coburn Salmon. So you can imagine the school roll call. Adam Bennett, here, sir. Mary McPherson, here, sir. Alan David Forrest Coburn Salmon, here, sir, not that I want to be. So began my life as a subject of constant ridicule, and hence my preference for being addressed as Sam. Although I was fortunate enough to be born and bred on my parents' farm in Margaret River in southwest Western Australia, I was burdened by having 3 older sisters, Julia, Penelope and Davinia, who bullied me then and they still bully me now. In the 50s, that strip of land between the 2 capes, Cape Naturalist in the north and Cape Lewin in the south, isn't what it's renowned for now, which is wineries, crafts, surfing, forests, and the coastline. In those days, it was a sleepy area consisting of mainly impoverished, struggling dairy farmers, which what my father was until he gave up dairying and commenced a sheep and cattle stud. And my parents, together with 2 other families, established Cape Mantel Winery, which is one of the original 5 wineries in South West. And despite being Anglican, my mother initially sent all of us to St Joseph's Catholic College. Where's that vodka? Catholic College, in my case, for 2 years. Then I went to Margaret Primary School, the junior high school, then boarding school in Perth. St Joseph's was interesting. Actually, I've got to put the stopwatch on because I don't want to get shot. I don't know how long I've been speaking for, but anyway, good. St Joseph's was interesting. It consists of two classrooms, 4 classes in one room with rows, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, and in the other room, grade 5, 6 and 7. Both rooms taught by one nun. But at least the 4 Anglicans that attended St Joseph's weren't subject to the regular Monday morning interrogation by the nuns saying, "Why weren't you at church on Sunday?" And this poor lady, 8-year-old, saying, "Sorry, sister." I mean, it's quite cruel in some ways, but we all took piano lessons, which were run by other sisters who used to use the edge of a ruler to discipline our around fingers. My forte was not only scales, but chopsticks. I was very talented with chopsticks, and I only took 3 years to pass preliminary. And since then, I've offered my service to Darcy, to Bill, to assist them in their musical endeavours, but so far they haven't responded positively. I'm also blessed in having my half-brother Peter Salmon. He was raised on the Northwest Station, or Norwest Station, which was partly owned by my father. Peter's 80 years old, and is a highly respected horseman come stockman in the Pilbara and the Kimberley. He still rides, and in fact he was recently featured in a program on the ABC as he's the last of his mob to speak the Tinma language. If you Google Peter Salmon ABC, you might find his story quite interesting. He's a very laconic bloke, you know, he's got his RMs and the hat and the moleskins, and he's come down to stay with me in Marg River a few times. And I remember once we went to the Borenup Gallery, which is a very exclusive gallery with paintings and pottery and furniture. So we went there, and I was quite impressed by, well, blown away by the prices. And I said to Peter, look at this desk. It was custom made, handmade, $33,000. And he says, yeah, for a bit of wood. So that was quite, he has this sort of attitude. I once asked him if he could track a person. And he looked at me and said, yeah. I said, so you could track a person across the desert? Yeah. As it was the stupidest question he could be asked. Darcy, I guess I have three loves or passions: family and friends, motor vehicles, and acting. This photo was taken in the late 1960s of a BSA car on our farm. That's Cave, if any of you know my river, that's Cave Road down there. That's the driveway to the farm. That's moi, my sister, and two of her friends. And Dad bought that for me on the day after Friday the 13th. It was Saturday the 14th, in January 1967. And I think my love of vehicles came from my maternal grandfather, who through the course of his life owned a number of interesting vehicles, including a succession of Jaguars. I hope we weren't timing that. This particular vehicle had been owned by the local hairdresser, who Dad saw in town one day in Marg River. And he asked him what happened to the BSA. And the hairdresser said, oh, I've replaced it. So Dad bought it for this princely sum of $20. We were shearing at the time, and I was the rouseabout, and I remember looking out of the shearing shed to see this vehicle coming up the road towards the shearing shed, driven by Dad, and my mother was in the passenger seat trying to be in period costume with his straw hat and the scarf over her hat. And you can imagine as a 13-year-old how excited I was to own my first vehicle, and I still have that now. That was after 53 years. Das. Now, after leaving school, a cousin and I decided to take a year's working holiday to Europe. This extended for 2 years in my case, during which, due to adverse circumstances on the farm, my parents had sold the property and they moved to Perth. So instead of returning from overseas to our idyllic farm, I returned to a suburban house and I attended university. At the time I tried to get into law, but I failed miserably. And so I went to Tasmania and worked in a mine at a place called Zeehan on the west coast. And due to the rich west coast mineral deposits, Zeehan in its heyday, prior to the World War I, was a boom town. It had a stock exchange, it had something like 78 hotels, and it had the Grand Hotel, and the Gaiety Theatre, and at the time it was the largest theatre built in Australia. And also Dame Nellie Melba performed at the the Gaiety Theatre in the Grand Hotel, as did Houdini. But when I went to Tasmania, firstly in 75, I think it was, the hotel was a single men's quarters for the mine workers, and the theatre was the home of ZATS, Zeehan Amateur Theatrical Society, and in which I performed in a number of its productions. After a year in Zeehan, I returned to Perth to study engineering. I thought, oh, I'd like to be a mining engineer. Again, I failed miserably. And I remember I hadn't done the physics and chemistry for 5 years. You know, and in engineering, a lot of smart people do engineering, and unfortunately, I wasn't one of them. And I remember in one particular lecture, we got the results of a multiple choice question. And as you know, the odds in multiple choices, the law of averages said you're going to get at least 25% right. Anyway, the papers were handed back and my results were 4 out of 25. And I felt silly. Anyway, then the lecturer saying, well, I've handed you all back the results. the top mark was 25 out of 25, and the lowest mark was 4 out of 25, and I felt even stupider. And this smart ass behind me was sitting me, he was a dux of a school in his own lifetime. He said, how could anyone be so dumb enough to get 25? And I turned around and said, yeah, I agree, it must be really thick. So at the end of 1976, so I pulled out of uni, the mine offered me a job back in Tasmania, in Zeehan, and I spent the next 3 years until 1979, when I was offered a position as the HR manager for a company at Pine Gap. Wow, what a contrast, what an eye-opener. From the 40-inch rainfall of Margaret River, where anything grew apart from pineapples, the bleak 90-inch rainfall of Zeehan, where it rained 9 months a year and then you had winter, to the arid heat of Alice Springs. I'd never heard of Pine Gap, and I certainly wasn't expecting to be offered a job there. I'd had an interview in Hobart, I'd had a second one in Sydney, and so I was comfortable in the fact that I'd done okay even if I didn't get the job, even if I was unsuccessful. Until like recently, when I applied for a nightful packer's job at a local major supermarket, and no, it wasn't Woolworths, but my application was rejected by the interviewer, who was slightly older than my 8-year-old grandson, on the grounds that I was overqualified. I've never taken... Oh, look, we're only at photo 5. Okay, well, until I'm dragged off, I'll keep going. Anyway, coming to Alice Springs was extraordinary. I didn't know that English was a second or third or fourth language to many people. I remember going to BP The Gap and listening to these Indigenous children chatting away. I thought, what on earth are they talking about? I remember my first recruitment trip to Darwin, and through the CES, they used to shortlist the applicants, and there was a chap called Murakami outside the room, and he was very Japanese looking. His surname was Murakami, so I thought this won't take long. So I went out there and said, good afternoon. My name is Salmon. He said, g'day, mate, how you going? That was another I was so naive. And as you know, most of us are aware, everyone who works at Pine Gap is either a gardener or a technician, apart from me, because my title was personal administrator. Which reminds me of a story told by probably Jude Mapleson, who worked for the CES in Alice Springs in the 80s. And she'd been conducting a careers conference with a local primary school. What do you want to do when you grow up? Oh, I want to be a plumber, taxi driver, fireman. There was a little American girl, and she said, what do you want to do when you grow up? And she said, oh, I want to be a nurse. She said, oh, you're American. Does Daddy work at Pine Gap? Yep. So what does Daddy do? Can't tell you. Well, what did you do in America? Oh, he was an electrical engineer. Anyway, so that's Pine Gap, and then the next photo, tell me if I'm going too far. I only wrote this morning, I haven't even timed it. Darcy, the Totem Theatre. I was initially unaware that in the era of the Cold War there was much local opposition to the existence of Pine Gap. So I wasn't readily accepted by many people who were probably more aligned with my lifestyle and my philosophies. But fortunately I joined the Totem Theatre and met many people with whom I'm still friends. For example, I assisted Helen Wilkinson, the Anzac School drama teacher, as well as being an active member of the Alice Springs Peace Group with a number of her productions. As well, I started going out with a woman called Kate Daly, who's quite well known in town, as well as being the maitre d' of the Old Pines restaurant, which some of you may recall, and run by Darryl and Hinton, and as well as Turner House, which, like Mara's news agency, was demolished in the middle of the night by the cowboy developers of the 80s. So I gradually became more accepted by people I wanted to spend time with. Because, for example, well, if he's friends with, say, Helen Wilkinson, and Kate's going out with him, he must be all right, but we still think he's a spy. I remember when I went to Pine Gap, someone gave me some dope, and I didn't really smoke dope except socially, but it didn't do anything for me. And they put it in a little container with cotton wool and moistened, and it was in my car, which arrived about 3 weeks after me. And at the time, I was living at Pine Gap in what's called BOQ rooms. They love anagrams out there. BOQ stands for Bachelor Officer Quarter. And our rooms were cleaned every day by the BOQ housemaids. And I had this little plastic container, and it was starting to spout. And it looked quite interesting. I thought, should I better do something about this before it actually gets leaves? Because maybe the BOQ maid will recognise for what it really is, so I had to get rid of it. So somewhere at Pine Gap, hopefully there's this dope plant still growing. Another thing about the Pine Gap, they had the demonstrations, and the women's demonstration of the 80s. Do you want me to stop?
Well, I'm not the boss, but
I better finish.
a couple of minutes.
I think there's just one more photo, isn't there?
Oh, well, okay. That's the photo. The next photo. Okay, we'll go to that. They're my two gorgeous daughters. I've been blessed with two beautiful daughters. That's Nicola, who was born in England when I was over there on a working holiday, and Monique, who was born in Alice Springs in 1982. Nicola's actually worked at Ashes. She came out to Australia. She lived in Australia for about 5 years. She's now back in the UK. She was raised by her English mother, Bernadette, and I'm so fortunate to still have a wonderful relationship with the two respective mothers of both Nicola and Bernadette. I should have said far more about my daughters than bloody cows or Pine Gap, I'm sorry. That was a photo of Nicola. There's two more photos. Oh yeah, this one. This is my grandson, Oliver Sam. We're about to take off. We're flying. That's at Whitley Bay up in south of the Scottish border on the north-east of England, where Oliver Sam's mother, Nicola, lives with Oliver Sam's father, Lawrence, is unwell. He's in a nursing home. And with the COVID-19, they've had a pretty difficult time. Oliver can't see Dad except through a glass wall. And yeah, it's all pretty ghastly. And then the final, don't worry about that. That's a car, another BSA I've got, to be honest with you. Now this demonstrates, finally, that tells me a lot. You might recognise Richard's comedy, Bill's section, and that's mine. And that picture tells a number of words. One that demonstrates the wonderful spirit in Alice Springs, a sense of community. I've known Bill and Anne for years. At one stage, I thought he was a grumpy old man. He still is, but at least he's nice to me now. I think it shows the value of friendship. Alice Springs is fabulous as being part of the community. I love it. And also, I'm the secretary of the Mecca, which is a motor enthusiast car club of Australia, of Central Australia, and which is voluntary work. And Jem was talking about voluntary work, and I used to be on the board of the Bindi Centre. I used to be on the board of Advocacy Southwest, which is a place in Bunbury where I worked as a solicitor for a number of years, which was Bindi's equivalent. And I'll finish up by saying, like Albert Fazey, I've had a really fortunate life. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Sam. Maddie Krenek. This is Maddie's home often here at Araluen, just around there, but she'll tell you her story. Thank you. Thanks, Maddie.
Ka tangi te titi, ka tangi te kaka, ka tangi hoki ko ti hei moriora. Hi everyone. I would like to respectfully acknowledge the country that we are meeting on today and the country of which I am a long-term visitor, Aranda country here in Mparntwe. From the moment I came here, I knew it was a very special place, and as we all know, it's such a privilege to live and work here. And I would like to pay my deep respects to Aranda elders, past, present, and those yet to come. And thank you for being such wonderful caretakers of this country. I'm nervous, man. Anyway, I'm Maddie, or Madeline Krenek, and I open this chat today with a tau parapara, which is the opening of a mihi or a greeting in Māori. It translates to the mutton bird cries, the parrot cries, and I also cry, behold, there is life. And it's commonly used before giving a speech in a Māori meeting, and it's an indication that one would like to speak. So here I am. and it felt appropriate for me to begin with the tauparapara today because I began my life learning Māori and English simultaneously at a kohanga reo, which is a Māori preschool, on a marae in Otautahi in Christchurch. So this is a photo of us at the kohanga. That's me in the bar, and that's my brother. But the reason I ended up in a kohanga is because when my mum was quite pregnant with my sister, she wasn't working and she just sort of rocked over to the marae and asked if they needed any help. And they were like, hell yeah, you can look after the kids and we'll go shopping and we'll do this and that. And so she ended up working in the kohanga with the other parents, and it was all parents volunteering their time. So it was like a shared responsibility of looking after everyone. And so obviously when we were all born, we were all raised in the kohanga. This is my mum teaching all the kids how to give a baby a bath, which I thought was quite cute because I was like, I don't know how many ways there are to do that. But the kids seem pretty engaged. So also following, I also wanted to say that on reflection, like, it was quite a bold move of my mum just to go over to the marae and say, do you need help? Because I think at that time, the situation between Māori people and colonisers in New Zealand was not quite what it is today. So I feel very proud of her and grateful for the experience that I had growing up because of that. And following the kohanga, I did go through primary school and intermediate school in a bilingual unit, so I was always speaking Māori in the classroom along with English. I reckon by photo 10 I'll be warmed up, but I'm still pretty nervous. Anyway, thanks, Das. This is in Golden Bay, the top of the South Island of New Zealand, which I spent pretty much every year of my life, summer there for 30 years. And that's us jumping off a rock, not flying out of the water. But I did want to mention this place because it's very, very special to me. And to get to this particular spot, you have to go down this dirt road, park up by these barns, go past these scary barky dogs, go through a paddock full of cows who are quite curious because they kind of gently follow you around, and then under an electric fence, and then you sort of skid down a bank and then you get there. And nobody else is ever there, that's why it's the best spot. Okay. This is me and my high school kapahaka group. That's me there. This was quite a significant moment for me, and it's also a photo on Instagram and then ripped from Instagram because I lost the photo. But it was quite a significant moment for me this time because when I got to high school, I started to become aware of my whiteness and that I wasn't actually Māori. And not from the Māori people at school, but just the mainstream kids are like, why are you in senior Māori, or why are you doing kapahaka? And I was like, I don't really know any different, but I guess I just started to become aware of myself in that space because of that. And my Māori teacher, Mātua Taimana, before the kapahaka competition, I think I was peeling potatoes, something in the kitchen, and he came in and he's like, I want to see a badass pukana from you tomorrow. He's like, there is nothing more fierce than a blue or green-eyed pukana, and you need to remember that. And I was like, yeah, okay, cool, yeah, sweet. But I think that moment just really empowered me and made me feel fiercely proud and strong. And there were many badass pukanas the next day at the competition. But yeah, it's a moment I remember very clearly at high school and sort of felt very supported by the Māori department. Thanks, Darcy. Oh, bang. Okay. So this is my grandparents on my dad's side, Ludwig and Liddle Krenek, and then my dad in the middle, and I thought I might share their story, a little bit of how they came to New Zealand. So during World War II, my granddad, Ludwig, was mountaineering in the Himalayas, and there is quite a famous story that is similar to his from the book 7 Years in Tibet, but that wasn't him, but he was mountaineering with Heinrich Harrer at the time. Anyway, they split off. They split off in the Himalayas and all got into Tibet at different times. and he spent most of the war in India. And when the war finished, my grandma, Liddle, was saying, "Are you going to come back to Vienna and let's get married and have kids?" And I think he was enjoying India so much that he was quite hesitant to come back, but then he finally decided that he was going to go back to Vienna. But the day before he left, he was like, "I might just go into the post office and see if there's anything for me." And he went into the post office and there was a telegraph from my grandma saying, "Well, if you're not going to come back here, then I'll come to you, so stay put, and I'm coming to India and we're going to get married and have kids and stuff." So they had my Auntie Gita in Darjeeling, and then when they were pregnant with my dad, that's when they moved to New Zealand. I don't know why they chose New Zealand. I've never found that out, but they did. But they were both also like quite adventurous people. My granddad, in 1936, he rode his motorbike from Cape Town to Cairo and through a whole bunch of villages and met heaps of amazing people and took all the silent film of that time, which was, I thought that was pretty cool. And also my grandma, my Oma, she was the first woman teacher in Wanganui, which is where they settled in New Zealand, and she was also the first woman to wear a bikini on the beach. So I thought that was pretty cool too, little fun facts. Frankie, can I have some water or something? I've got a really dry mouth. Cheers, Darcy. Oh, yeah. So this is my parents' band. When we were growing up, they were in a 60s, 70s rock and roll cover band called the Suburban Relics. Thank you. And it was quite a big band. Oh, that's it. But I wanted to show this photo because I really feel like I was brought up by a community and not just my parents. Between the kohanga and between the band, there was a lot of co-parenting happening, a lot of kids, and it was, I feel like that was a really special way to grow up. It wasn't, it was just a very community vibe. This photo was taken after a recording session at this guy David Round's house in Port Levy. He's got this big old mansion that everybody fits in. But the band was, they were hobby musicians. They weren't full-time musicians. They were all like maths teachers and scientists and stuff during the day, and then at night they became the Suburban Relics. But they didn't take themselves very seriously, but they kind of did at the same time. But when I say that they're not pro musicians, I believe they're professionals in like having a good time and throwing a good party. That was kind of what they were most known for around Christchurch. This is, they used to throw this party every year called the Raging Ball, and it was a heavily themed costume party, and people would spend many months getting their costumes ready. But I wanted to show this photo just so you could sort of see the extent they went to push the theme of the night. But yeah, this is some sort of bicycle carving and the sets, and you know, that's also my dad in the shiny red uniform. But yeah, they had a good time. We all had a good time. It was pretty fun growing up amongst all of that, amongst a lot of music and a lot of people. Oh, bang, okay. I'll speed up. Oh yeah, that's a photo of me dancing. I'm a contemporary dancer. I was danced for most of my life, and in 2000, and doesn't matter what year it was, when I was 18, I moved to the VCA, moved to Australia from New Zealand to go to the VCA and study dance. And that's where I met Frankie Snowden, who probably a lot of you know, but we pretty much met on day dot and went, I reckon we're going to be best friends. We still are. So that was a pretty good prediction 15 years ago. But in getting to know Frankie, I learnt that she was from the desert. She was from here in Mparntwe. And I was massively fascinated by it, so different to New Zealand. And I sort of said, as soon as I've got the chance, I'm going to come to your house and I'm going to see some red dirt. And in our semester break, I came to Alice and I stayed in the Snowden household, and Lizzie welcomed me in like another daughter, which there's no surprises that she would do that. So that was really lovely. And that was in 2007. That's when I began courting with the desert, I guess. After that initial visit, went back to Melbourne, spent the best part of 10 years working in Melbourne as a dancer, and some in Chicago, some in New Zealand and in Europe as well. Also during that time in 2012, Frankie and myself and Lizzie and our mate Adam dreamed up a little project which over time has become quite a significant part of our careers and our lives. So Alice Can Dance, this is Alice Can Dance, is a project where we go into schools and work with over 250 kids to create a large-scale multimedia dance show which is performed here at the Araluen. Much of the chaos happens in this room. But this photo just kind of shows the scope of the work and the beautiful chaos that surrounds the day of performance. So we started this in 2012, and it was at that time kind of fly in, fly out, having a wonderful time, but I never really saw myself actually living here. But over time, as the project got bigger and bigger and I was spending more and more time here and like getting to know the community, I really started to understand why people live here and how compelling this place is. Also, Frankie and I started to see the potential of how to create other work outside of Alice Can Dance here in a professional dance capacity. But I wanted to show this photo because Alice Can Dance is really special to me, and we still do it every year, and it kind of sparked the slow but steady move away from the city here to Alice. Cool. In 2015, Frankie and I applied for some funding to create a professional dance work here called the Perception Experiment. We'd been working on ideas separate from each other when we decided to bring that together and create a work here. 2 years after that, we premiered it here at the Araluen in one of the galleries down there. And the season was fantastic and wonderful, but we never thought that the show would see the light of day again. But 2 years after that, so March 2019 to March 2020, we have performed the same show in Melbourne, Guadalajara in Mexico, Darwin, Kalgoorlie, Brisbane, Warrnambool, Coffs Harbour, Townsville and Katherine. So it had quite a life after that initial season. And this photo is Frankie and I outside the venue that we performed in Mexico, and we're very proud choreographers. We had a name up on the wall on the street. So that was definitely a highlight in my career. And this is another highlight in my life. This is my partner, Sandrine. We met here in 2016 at Wide Open Space. And then I went to Europe and she went to Melbourne, and I was in Melbourne and she was coming back here and I was kind of coming back here. But, anyway, we've been here together since 2017. And I guess I want to say that I'm super grateful that she has chosen me and that we've chosen this place and this community to build our life together. That's it. Oh, and thank you to Annie P and the Friends of the Araluen for making me do the scariest thing in the world, but I did it, so yeah.
Well, she was scared, but she's really a performer, isn't she? She really is a performer. Thanks, Maddie. That was great. Last but not least, King Marong. Pleasure to have you. Thanks.
Good day, everyone. Thank you all for having me here. And thanks to Anne for having me. When she first told me about this thing, I'm like, when I left Melbourne, I thought I don't want to come and talk about King Marong again. I just want to play my cultural music and talk about culture to people. I just don't want to talk about King Marong again. But she's like, oh, it'd be good to people to know about, who you are and where you come from and stuff. So I come from the Gambia, West Africa. I came to Australia in end of 1998 to South Australia, and lived in South Australia for about 3 years, I think, 3 years or 4 years, working in schools, doing cultural music in schools. And then 2000, and after that 3 years, moved to Melbourne, and then I got a lot of students when I was living in Gambia. I got people from Australia come down and learn drums from me, So I know a lot of people in Melbourne already before I came to Australia. So I decided to go to Melbourne and do music, and cultural music. But I'll go back to the point where I come from in the Gambia, the photo that is there right now. That's a boat. So during Christmas, all the young fellows, we all go back home after, all the schools are closed, we all go back home. So, and we have clubs. So every group, every team, every club have to make their own boat. And this boat, the best one goes to the museum every year, every Christmas, in the New Year. So they will, everybody take it to your best friend or your friend, so you can make a small lantern for your best friend. So the reason why this is for the, why we make these boats, because when they brought the slaves back from America, from England, back to Gambia, so this is the only kind of cultural thing that we share with them. So during Christmas, we play music during the days, and at night we take the boat out to go around and around the community. So at New Year's, then you can give the boat to someone that you like or a community that you like. So this is where my talent came out of when I was young. So that's how I started drumming from the Christmas club. So I was natural. So I came every time I drum, people were like, "No, we want you back." I'm like, "No, I can't," because I was always shy to play. And like always when I go, they're like, "No, you're good. We like what you're doing, so you keep playing." I'm like, "No, I just want to, have a break all the time." So people like, so yeah, the whole community saw my talent, and they know that I'm natural. I don't have to force it. My dad, he used his mouth to make music, and that's how he make his living. He sell food. He's a cook, and he sell food, and he play music for people to dance with his mouth, and he tell them jokes, and then he make his money like that. So yeah, so I just got a natural talent. So all I need to do was to go and research and learn about the cultural rhythms or cultural stories and stuff. So that's what my focus was on, to learn about my culture, about the histories and stuff. So I don't have to go and learn the technique, how to use the drums or anything, because I already know that. So that was easy way for me out. So I don't have to force it. So yeah, so this is the boat we use. So every Christmas, like now, everyone is busy making the best boat. So it's from bamboo tree and white paper we design, and then we make holes on it to put the design out. So, and then you put a candle, you lit a candle in the middle. So in the night, when it's dark, it's beautiful. It's like you walk around and you got the captain goes in the front and have the whistle, and then you have 3 people on each side. So when he blow the whistle, then they get ready, then he blow it again, then they lift. So he kind of control the people to go like that. Yeah. Thanks. And that's my wife, Beck. She played the kora, which is a 21-string instrument. I came to Alice Springs about 20 years now. I came to the Desert Festival to perform, and I met Beck here, and I keep going back to Melbourne and forward. Then she come back, and we finally we come back to Alice Springs and live here, and we got 2 beautiful children here. Yeah, and so Beck and I, we went back to the Gambia and studied traditional music with the instruments and stuff, so we can play together and travel together and make music. And so music has been all my life. I travel around different places, different countries before I get to Australia to play music, playing festivals, and go to schools and do music. Just that basically is my life. It's all about music. That's what people, when I go back to Africa, people are like, "What have you been doing?" Music. Every time, so they answer the question for themselves. It's like, "What have you been doing?" Playing drums or festivals. All my stories about festivals and playing music. Gambia is a beautiful, I've grown up in a coastal town where the Atlantic Ocean starts and the river Gambia. So at the point, So this is the river side of it. So we grown up on the beach, so every day we spend all our days on the beach, playing drums on the beach, swimming and having fun, basically on the beach. And we have a lot of hotels and restaurants, so all the Europeans come down to Gambia for holidays. So Gambia is all surrounded by water and a lot of beautiful beach. So we got a lot of hotels, restaurants, beach bars. So I grown up 5 minutes, my house is 5 minutes from the beach. So I go there, I see a whole heaps of people laying down in the sun. So I'm like, wow, this is crazy. How can these people lie in the sun like that? It's hot. And I try to do it, but I can't. Not for long. I have to go in the water all the time when I come in the sun. So I kind of like to sit on the shade, under the baobab tree all the time, or the coconut tree, So, yeah. So Gambia basically is peaceful country, beautiful place, beautiful beaches, beautiful people. We have beautiful culture. We have all different tribes, so we use the music. All these tribes, we use the drums, the music to break barriers among all of our tribes, and we all intermarried as well as, the community together as a whole, the whole community. So we all live together. We have no barriers between tribes, can't marry, so we all mix. You don't know who is who anyway. For example, because everybody celebrates everything. So when it's time for celebrations, we all celebrate everything. People just get up, and Christmas, Muslims go and you're like, why are you celebrating? It's like Christmas is coming, and the Muslims celebrate it more than the Christians even, because what we have to go through to make all the boats and all this stuff. So when it's, as well as when it's Tobaski and the Christians too, they dress up nice, they buy all these things like, are you going to the mosque? They're like, yeah, we're going because we're ready, We bought all these beautiful things. So everybody, kind of Gambia, grown up like that in a beautiful community. Everybody, we were really bringing people together through music, life, and I got the opportunity growing up as well. My uncle, he played the Scottish pipe at the Gambia Police Band. So I got the opportunity to chance to learn see people playing all these Western instruments. So I usually go there all the time when they're practicing. I listen to them, and they're like, "Why you don't go and play with others?" I'm like, "No, I'm good here. I just want to listen to what you guys doing and stuff." So then I start to kind of create my own style of music, basically, because I've learned from all different tribes. So now it's time for me to step up, to put my final touch, to say, this is what I present to the community. So I did that, bringing all the cultures together, and I got this kind of talent. I can make a line, and I can kind of sing the horn lines and the whole music thing, the whole part. I can do the bass, I can do the guitar, I got everything in my head. So every time my friends come, I'm like, you play this one. And I tell the other one, you play that one, then, make a music. And they're like, how did you know all this? I'm like, don't worry about it, we just play. So that's how I got the name King in the Gambia, because of that talent that I put all these musics together, and I create a lot of different style of music. Yeah, thank you. So since living in Australia, basically, I've been playing music around different places. I performed at the Logies in Australia, performed at all the major festivals in Australia. I travel around all over Australia, got a national funding to do tours around Australia. And that's all I do around, play music and travel around the festivals. And thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
I think we've had a good taste of the diversity of Alice Springs. We haven't had to live here 40 years to be like everyone else here, to be accepted. And it's just wonderful to have shared in those stories. Thanks very much to the 6 speakers. I don't need to name you, thanks very much. Thanks to the Friends of Araluen Committee. As I said, we've got money for 2 more of these sessions. We'll look at what they might be like. But early in the new year, if you've enjoyed it, we'd love you to come back. Thanks also to Darcy, who's done the images, and to Meredith on the bell. Thank you, Beth. Glad we didn't let her in with that big bell, that's all I'm thinking. And to Andre for the filming, thank you very much. So, hope I haven't forgotten anyone. Anyway, thanks for coming, everybody. Look forward to more conversations. Thank you.